Morning, everyone. I'm not sure if you guys know what Nielsen does, but if you are not familiar with Nielsen, we're not the dairy company. I get that question asked a lot. Oh, we love your chocolate milk. No, you don't. You don't. Actually, it's funny because sometimes we get questions from consumers asking, my milk has expired, how long can I wait till I drink it? Do I throw it out now? No, that's not what we do. Basically what we do, we measure attitudes of consumers, consumer shopping behavior for CPG, consumer packaged goods. We want to know what consumers are shopping. We want to know why, the motivators, and everything behind that. So that's what I'm going to be walking you through today. This, as Jim said, is right fresh off the press. We just got the data 2 weeks ago. So as Mary was saying, I was actually rushing to get my slides done because I was so excited, like a kid in Christmas morning, going through the data, finding all these results. So I'm super excited to present this today to you. Some of the findings were very exciting for me. Some of them were very similar to what we ran last year. So what we're going to be talking today is consumer attitudes towards food and health, how those attitudes are changing and how they're shaping the way that we eat. So as you know, health has many different meanings for different people. Everyone's going to give you a different answer if you ask them what health means to them. But regardless of the different meaning, health has become a top priority for Canadians. So let's get started. We have a weight problem in Canada. This, and I have to say before I start my presentation that all the numbers that we're going to see here are self-reported from consumers. So we asked consumers all these questions because we wanted to know their sentiment towards food and health. So we do have a weight problem in Canada where 71% of us consider ourselves overweight, whether that's by a little or by a lot. And even though the government is doing what they can to ensure that we have more transparency and that consumers know what they're eating, it seems like consumers are taking matters onto their own health because we have 54% of them that are saying that they're trying to lose weight. So there's a lot more research that is being put from the side of consumers to understand what's healthy and what's not. And if you're wondering what are some of those activities that consumers are doing to lose weight, we have, not surprising, changing diet with 83% of consumers doing that and incorporating more physical exercise. So basically going back to basics, we're not going to extremes to lose weight, we're doing it the right way. Some other things that Canadians are doing, we're trying to drink more water. We're trying to get a better night's sleep. And we're trying to keep an eye on our work-life balance. Which this means is that we're not looking at health only from a physical perspective, we're also looking at it more holistically, and we're trying to incorporate things that will benefit our mental health, our physical health, and our emotional health. Now we have that 1 in 5 consumers are going into relaxation and meditation techniques. If you think about it, if we had run this study a few years ago, probably 10, 15 years ago, the number would have been lower. So Canadians are getting more into this yoga and meditation trend, and it's becoming more mainstream. I have to say that for a number of years, I was a closeted meditator because it wasn't so cool to be meditating, right? People would imagine that you're just, wearing your sandals and your Jesus robe and you're just cross-legged doing something that nobody understood. So for a number of years, I actually didn't tell all of my friends that I was meditating, but now it's actually kind of cool and a lot more people are doing it. So in terms of water, let's look at what consumers are actually doing when it comes to the store. So we are saying that we are drinking more water with 74% of us drinking more, but when it comes to the store, let's see if that attitude translates into behavior. So we have here 3 different categories that we track at Nielsen: flat water or bottled water, carbonated water, and coconut water. We have their sales in millions, and we have the percent change versus last year measured in dollars and in consumption in terms of liters. So for bottled water, it's actually pretty flat. So it seems that consumers are favoring different types of water when we look at the sales of carbonated water and coconut water. For coconut, though, the double-digit numbers that we were reporting a couple of years ago have flattened down a little bit. The growth has slowed. However, when you look at the actual consumption in liters, it's growing at 2%. So we're still getting some of that coconut water into us. For carbonated water, double-digit growth for both dollars and consumption. So what this means is that consumers are actually being driven by innovation for carbonated water. We see a lot of different formats. We see a lot more flavors. There's a lot more choice for consumers out there when it comes to carbonated water. So consumers are preferring the fizzy instead of the calories from coconut water. Now, we asked consumers to let us know what were the most important factors when it comes to healthy eating. Actually, no. We asked that too. But for this slide, what we asked consumers was to let us know what was the number one motivator when it comes to making healthy food choices. We have that 70% of Canadians say that the number one motivation for making better choices when it comes to food is to prevent future health issues. And this number is highly driven by boomers. So think about it. Boomers, they're aging, they're suffering from chronic ailments, and one of the motivators for them is to prevent more. And a lot of their food consumption that boomers are choosing revolves around their health issues. For number two, we have look and feel good. Not surprising, that was driven mostly by, if you're thinking about generations, you guessed, millennials. So for millennials, we have them split into two different groups. They're a very large generation if we measure by birth years. So we have the group that is single and ready to mingle. So for them, looking good and feeling good is important. If you look down the list, we have setting a good example for the family. That number is also driven by millennials, but a different set of millennials. These are the ones that are starting to settle down, have families, have babies. So for them, setting a good example is important. For boomers, not so much. They've done the parenting, they're done with it. Now they're just in another set of mind. So now I want to see a show of hands. When you see the saying, "I am what I eat," how many of you feel identified with that saying? How many of you feel that describes your eating patterns? And there's someone laughing. Okay, that's actually pretty accurate according to our survey, because 60% of Canadians feel that the saying, "I am what I eat," rings true to them. So what does that mean? That means that we are looking at food more as medicine rather than just something that feeds our body. We actually see it as a way to prevent conditions. We actually see it as a way to promote health. And when we look at the numbers, 74% of us prefer to cook at home so that we know what goes into our food, and we're placing more importance into the quality of the foods that we're eating, and we're actually willing to pay more for certain types of foods. So this is huge for the food industry. This means that there's tremendous opportunity for the food industry to become an ally in consumers' quest for health by offering healthier meal solutions and actually listening to consumers are wanting more of in the foods that we eat. And it appears that consumers are willing to back up their sentiments with their wallets. 47% of us say that we're willing to pay more for foods that don't contain ingredients that they don't want. That number, though, is lower from when we ran the study last year, 7 points lower. But I suspect that the reason that the number is lower is because food prices are higher this year than they were a year ago. If you've been following economics, you'll know that food prices is in the top 5 concerns for Canadians in the last quarter. So when we ran the study in 2017, food prices were actually very low. We experienced a war in price led by a lot of retailers in Canada. Right now, prices are going a little bit higher. However, that number is still quite representative when we have that almost 50% of consumers say that they would pay more for quality food. That number is in part driven by what we call sensitive stomachs and enlightened eating. So, sensitive stomachs. Think of those Canadians that suffer any type of food allergy, food intolerance. So these are consumers that actually have to keep an eye on what they eat to maintain their conditions or their health conditions in check. In Canada, we have that 29% of households have at least one member in the house that has some type of food intolerance or allergy. Self-reported, again, 4 of the major conditions in Canada are against dairy, shellfish, wheat and gluten, and peanuts. What we call enlightened eating. The term refers to those of us that don't necessarily have a health condition, but we choose for personal reasons to restrict, regulate, or control the foods that we eat. And we all know someone who does that, and probably many people in the room are restricting their food in some way. My personal example, I am a vegetarian. I became a vegetarian 4 years ago. And in Canada, we have that a lot of us are sugar conscious, limiting the amounts that we eat, or either restricting it or eliminating it from our diets. So we have out of the top 10 low fats, lactose and dairy, low sugar, as I said before, low sodium, and 3 key buzzwords that are going around a lot in the world of healthy eating and social media. We have the ketogenic diet, the flexitarians, and the intermittent fasting. So for the ketogenic diet, I'm no expert, I'm just curious about food, but the ketogenic diet refers to those of us who are eating a lot more fast to enter into ketosis stages so that we burn more fat and grow more muscle. The flexitarians are those of us who vary between a vegetarian, vegan diet and a meat diet. So if you've heard of Meatless Mondays, or people who are eating a vegetarian diet during the week, and then during the weekend they eat meat or whatever they want. And intermittent fasting, any of you familiar with the term? No, really. I've been doing intermittent fasting for a few months, and I actually really like it. So it's either called intermittent fast or time-restricted eating. It works under the premise that you are restricting the time in the day in which you're consuming foods. So it could be 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours, but you're not eating foods during the entire day. So say you eat dinner at 8 p.m., and you're going to have your next meal the next day at around 11, 12 p.m. I'm no expert, as I said, but it's supposed to be good for entering a state of ketosis as well, and for lowering your amounts of fat in your body. So self-regulating, enlightened eating, and sensitive stomachs are very important in the decisions that we're making when it comes to food in Canada. And if you add that to the fact that food is placing a big importance in the minds of Canadians, that results in 65% of us thinking that eating healthy is a vital part of our lives. So it is for most, but it is an equal number of Canadians that think that doing it right is also a challenge. So that's really not a surprise. When you think about it, there's so much information out there regarding food, what's healthy, what's not, that is really hard to make up your mind to what's most beneficial for you. And it becomes really challenging and quite overwhelming when you're trying to feed your family the right amounts of foods. So it seems that even though we find it difficult, majority of Canadians are trying to do the right thing. We have that 69% say that they're actively working to become healthier or to maintain their levels. They're eating healthier now than before, and 56% say that they're actively seeking out products to protect their family's health. So family is a huge priority for Canadians. So again, for the food industry, it is important to understand what Canadians are saying. It is important to understand what's actually motivating them to eat healthier, and it is important to embrace those attitudes. When the food industry embraces those attitudes, we can actually make better decisions when it comes to product making, and we can have more targeted innovation. So what makes a meal healthy? We asked consumers to let us know what they felt was the ideal Canadian diet. So if you go down the list, you're going to see a lot of the usual suspects here. More fruits and vegetables, less sugars, less salt, smaller portions, and one key word that keeps coming up in several studies that we've done at Nielsen, the presence of natural ingredients. So natural, if you ask 1,000 people, probably you're going to get 1,000 different definitions of what it means. But in general terms, it refers to the desire to have less processed foods, foods that are more into their natural state. So is that attitude about, number one, eating more fruits and vegetables, is it actually translating into the store? So when we look at the categories that we track at Nielsen for produce, fruits and vegetables, we actually see that, yes, we are consuming more and we are paying more for it as well. So when you look at the vegetables, they are growing in dollars at 6%, and fruits are right behind it at 4%. You look at the column on the right of each box, and that is tonnage measured in kilograms. So yes, one of the things that is driving the more dollars for fresh fruits and vegetables is the higher prices. As I said, we're having higher prices right now in Canada. However, when you look at the kgs, consumption is actually growing for most of these categories. So what this means is, yes, we are paying more for produce, but at the same time, we're putting more produce into our baskets, which is good. So as we have things that we want more of, there are ingredients that are equally undesirable. So if you go down the list, there's a word that keeps coming up as well. We have artificial sweeteners, preservatives, flavors, and colors. They all make the list of ingredients that we don't want. So one thing that we've noticed, not only with this study, but some previous studies that we've done at Nielsen, is that consumers are going back to what we call the back to basics trend, meaning minimally processed, not a lot of ingredients taken out, not a lot of ingredients added to our foods either. So let's see an example of how this works at the store level. We have 6 categories here out of the 500 that we track at Nielsen. So if you look at ice cream, yogurt, and sour cream, notice the growth numbers. So we have a couple of segments for each of these categories. We have the regular segment, meaning the products in their full fat, and the light segment, meaning the products when they have advertising of low fat or no fat. So the regular version is actually growing for those 3 categories. Look at the light. For ice cream, it's actually decreasing a double digit, and it's decreasing for the 3 categories. For peanut butter, we were just talking about Mary's presentation regarding nuts and seeds. So natural peanut butter is actually growing at 7%. The more mainstream or commercial, the one that has the sugar added, the salt added, is actually pretty flat right now. So natural peanut butter growing at 7%, that means that it's actually growing higher than the total market, which is at about 2%. For plant-based beverages, same thing, growing at 7%. So for plant-based beverages, they don't necessarily have to be less processed, but consumers perceive them to be better for you. And when it comes to milk, milk is the largest category that we track at Nielsen. The whole milk is growing at 8%. If you look at the skim milk, so the 2%, 1%, and the no fat, that's declining at 10%. So consumers are actually moving towards something that they consider fewer ingredients, minimally processed, more natural. If you think about it, that's pretty much the definition of a clean diet, a term that we've been hearing about for the last few years. And when it comes to another huge influencer to what we put in our baskets, we have food attributes. So this list is actually not that different from the factors that make a meal healthy, but here we're talking about specifically what consumers perceive the items that they're considering to be. So in terms of perception, there's a few factors that come into play. The first one is what we know about the food products that we're considering, and the second one is what manufacturers are telling us about those items. So for the things that we know about the product, think about the perimeter of the store. If you see a head of cauliflower or some broccoli florets, you probably don't need a label to know that it's going to be better for you, that it's probably higher in fiber, that it has more protein. So these are things that you already know about the product. Whether that's true or not for you, that's a different story. But this is pretty much what you have previous knowledge about. When it comes to labeling, these are the things that manufacturers and brands are making an effort to let you, the consumer, know. So again, high protein, low sugar, that type of thing. So consumers value transparency when it comes to labels, and they actually really appreciate manufacturers that are trying to communicate those attributes in a genuine way. Now, let's take a look at one of the most talked about meals of the day. I was very curious to understand consumer sentiment when it came to breakfast, because we have so much buzz around social media regarding what's healthy and what's not healthy. But it seems like we're right in the middle when it comes to breakfast. So 50% of us still think that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. And when you look at the metrics, it seems like we are having a homemade breakfast, and we eat it at home, and we're actually eating a healthy breakfast as well. The numbers vary between weekend and weekdays, but when you look at the percentage of Canadians that are eating that are eating breakfast as a family. The number is higher for weekends, 47%. I was pleasantly surprised to see that number. I thought that it was going to be a lot lower, considering that it seems that we have busier lives. So we're having homemade breakfast, healthy, and eating as a family, but 18% of us are still skipping it. But if you look at future intention, it seems like 10% of us are actually intending to have more breakfast during the week in the next 3 months. There is a percentage of us, 15%, that are quite content not having breakfast every day, and we're intending to actually keep that same pattern. And there's a 73% of us who feel that eating breakfast every day is the way to go, and we will continue to do so. So if you've noticed, those three numbers don't add up to 100%. The difference of 2% comes to those of us who are actually intending to have less breakfast during the week in the next few months. And what makes the ideal Canadian breakfast? So flavorful and filling come on top. So all these talk about health, and it seems like taste is what rules the Canadian breakfast. When it comes to health attributes, we have high in protein, high fiber, low in sugar, made with whole grains, all kinds of things that we're wanting in the ideal breakfast. However, when you think about it, we were expecting to see a health attribute in the top. Amongst the top 10, we also have can be eaten at any time. That's I'm in that bucket because I love pancakes for dinner, eggs for dinner, oatmeal at any time of the day. So more Canadians are actually looking for that, for foods that we can eat any time of the day and still call them breakfast foods. So when you look down the list, high in protein is the highest health attribute that we have in the ideal Canadian breakfast. There's been a lot of talk about protein in the last few years, whether it's better for you to have a higher protein diet, the benefits of having it, the amount of protein that you're getting, and the sources, whether it's animal or whether it's plant-based. So we conducted another study at Nielsen to understand Canadians' attitudes towards protein. Turns out that majority is having protein at every meal. 31% of us say that the source does matter. So whether your protein comes from an animal or it comes from a plant, these consumers do care about it. And the opinions are very equally split when it comes to the sourcing, because we actually have that 32% of consumers feel that they don't care. Whether it comes from an animal, whether it comes from plants, they're equally content. So that leaves a 37% group. This is the group that don't have a strong opinion on the matter, and they will be less likely convinced by manufacturer claims, differentiation, marketing campaigns, and that type of thing. And last but not least, we have 21% that consistently monitor their protein and their daily intake. So what do you think about protein? Do you think it's a fad? Is it a trend? Are we going to keep hearing about protein? Fad? Trend? Okay, I think we're pretty equally split. And I think it's too early to tell. Protein is a macronutrient. We all need it. We're going to keep hearing about it. But we probably are going to see that the numbers are going to be tame at some point. But protein is going to continue to be a topic of talk among Canadian consumers. So at the store level, we actually see who drives the growth. It is plant-based. Even though animal protein owns majority of the share when it comes to dollars, it is the plant-based kinds that are driving the growth. Here we're including things like nuts, seeds, grains, legumes, and meat and dairy alternatives. One thing that struck me the most when it came to this study is that 43% of Canadians actually think that they want to increase their consumption of I can't speak this morning. I don't know what is it, the Halifax weather? I don't know what it is, but I'm getting tongue-tied. So 43% of us say that we're going to incorporate more plant-based foods in the future. That number is highly driven by two consumers, young consumers and multicultural consumers. So even though we're going to continue to see the increase in plant-based, meat is not going to disappear anytime soon from the Canadian plate. And in fact, it is the #1 source of protein for Canadians. So we ask consumers to let us know their top 3 protein sources. We have meat is the #1, followed by dairy, eggs, fish and seafood, and to round up the top 3, we have legumes, nuts, and seeds. And the intentions to eat more are higher for legumes, nuts, and seeds, and fish and seafood. Notice how there's a 15% of consumers who are saying that they will intend to eat less meat and animal products in the next few months. So it's important to understand what consumers are wanting. As I said, they're going back towards something that is minimal, less processed, and that is actually true when it comes to protein as well. And the opinions are pretty split. So consumers see benefits in both. They have opinions ranging from unprocessed meat is good for you, there's no need to eat meat in this day and age. If you are not eating animal protein, you probably are deficient in some ingredients, some nutrients. So even though the opinions are split, it is balance that brings us together. When we have that 67% of consumers say that it is optimal to have both plants and animals in our diet to have the ideal health. So again, understanding what consumers want will be important when we're talking about innovation and meeting the requirements of a healthy diet. And in the topic of sourcing, consumers are placing great importance in the origin of their foods. We have now more than ever that consumers are finding that anything that reflects what they are believing sustainable or environmentally friendly is very important to them. So we have 46% of consumers saying that environmentally friendly and sustainably grown foods are important to them, and we have a 38% group that choose local, natural, and organic ingredients when they can. So this means that when you're offering something that has health benefits and environmental benefits, it needs to have a direct personal message to the consumer, and the message has to be communicated well. But in order for consumers to come back for more, you have to deliver on taste as well. When it comes to influencers, family, friends, and healthcare professionals are way up there. Just keep in mind that these top 2 influencers are going to come in the form of virtual communication via social media or the internet. That means Dr. Google. And you know who you are. We're all going into Google to look up our symptoms, look up what's going on, healthy or not. So just don't do it, because Google's terrible for that. You're probably going to find out things that you don't want to know. And if you look at down the list for external sources, we have things like signs, brochures, packaging claims. So anything that companies are doing to communicate their benefits is going to be up there as well. And if you look down the list, there's a not so shabby 11% for social media influencers. So social media influencers are those individuals who have amassed a decent amount of followers, and that gives them the credit for what they're saying. Whether they have the credentials or not, that's a different story, but more consumers are actually listening to the social media influencers to see what's healthy and what's not. And that brings me to the use of devices. So there's 39% of Canadians that are using the internet to do nutrition research, to post fitness tips, to see what's going on when it comes on terms of health. So what does that mean? That means that Canadians are making more decisions based on research that they're doing even before they hit the store. So websites, blogs, social media, they're all going to drive product trial, and consumers are going to come to the store knowing exactly what they want even before they enter. And last but not least, a quick view on trust. So if we had run this study a few years ago, the results would have probably been quite different. We now have a consumer that is very label savvy. They know their way around labels, and they actually are reading the labels. So they value consumers who are trying, not consumers, they value brands and manufacturers that are trying to improve themselves, do better for their products, and an attribute or health claim on their own is not going to be enough to gain brand fans. We need to communicate your message in a very genuine way. You need to establish a relationship with consumers so that they know that they can trust you. So having said that, A few strategies for growth. Just keep it simple. As I said many times in my presentation, consumers are wanting less. The term less is more comes true when it comes to consumers in Canada and what's going on in health these days. So they don't want some ingredients. They want something that is minimally processed. They want a diet that is cleaner. So with that, we shouldn't be afraid to innovate just to meet those consumer demands, but we don't have to go at it alone. There's a lot of information that we have at our fingertips. Consumers are telling us what they want, and it's important to embrace that and understand what they want. And be transparent in communication. Consumers really value that, and you have to keep in mind that consumers view brands as something that they wanna hang out with, so they only wanna buy those brands that they view as friends and that are keeping a communication quite open. Thank you.
We'll open the floor to questions now. If there are some questions, please use the microphone.
Lena Paulionis from Intertech. Thank you, Isabel. I wonder, could you profile your respondents for us? So the number of respondents to your survey, their demographics, age, gender, health status, et cetera?
Mm-hmm. Yes, so we have a panel that we work with Nielsen. We ran the study about a year ago, and we done it again in April of this year. We had around 4,700 respondents last year. I can't tell you the exact number for 2018, but it was higher. So it was on the 5,000s. What we tried to do with our panel is to have a very representative group of Canada. So I'm not an expert of all the behind the scenes of the panel, but I know that the way it works is that we look at Statistics Canada, we see how Canada is represented, and we try our best to replicate our panel with those same characteristics. So say in Canada we have around 26, 27% of millennials, and the number is about the same for boomers, about 14, 15% of Gen Xers, and we try to replicate those same numbers so that our surveys are going to be very representative of the Canadian population.
I probably don't need a microphone. When you read the response that consumers were willing to pay more, did you quantify how much percent they were willing to pay for more on a similar product?
We did not, but that's something that we can actually do. One of the things that we have to keep in mind is that, and this is something that we have the disclaimer for most of the studies that we do at Nielsen, is that the way consumers respond to our service is very idealistic. So you always have that degree of, this is what I should be responding because this is the ideal response, and this is what I want people to perceive me at. So yes, we know that they probably do want to pay more. However, it might translate differently when they are faced with an organic product that is probably going to be 5-7% more than something that is non-organic.
Hi, I just want to ask, did you also try to match socioeconomic status when you were trying to figure out how this matches up with the Canadian population? So not just age, but also how that's matched with the Canadian population?
Okay. One thing that we have to keep in mind is that all of our surveys are online, and so that little piece right there skews the result a little bit, because then you're going to be talking to people who have access to the internet, who have access to a computer, so that probably have a higher income. However, we do have breaks for all of our income, level of education, degree, work type, and all those kinds of demographics. And we do, as I said earlier, we do try to have a very representative of the Canadian market sample.
Just out of curiosity, you said 69% of Canadian read labels. Do you have any information of what they look at on the label? More?
Sorry, I can't really hear you.
Do they, the 69% that looks at labels, that read label, what are they looking at on the label? Did you look at, is it more the ingredient list? Is it more the nutrition facts information or the claims? Do you have some information?
It's a little bit of both. So when we're talking about the labels, we're not talking about claims. That would be a separate subject. So the claim would be, the question would be phrased specifically about a health attribute or claim that is specifically shown in packaging. When we're asking about labels, it's basically the nutrition label. So yes, we found that consumers are looking at both, not only daily recommended amounts, but the calorie content as well.
Thank you.
Wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I was just curious, you have a really good, you have a perspective on the Canadian environment. Just curious if you've done any work with collaborators looking at global trends.
Yes. So we have a presence in 60 different countries. I exclusively work with Canada. Last year, I was working with both Canada and the US, and we actually conducted this study in both. So we have the Happy Healthy Home study, the protein study, and the breakfast study, both for US and Canada. And we do have a lot of global information as well. I don't have any numbers to tell you because I'm not savvy on everything that's going on around the world, but we do have specific questions that we ask in every different country that we do. I know that Australia, for example, Nielsen Australia has leveraged a lot of the insights that we've derived here, that all the stuff that we went through today, because they find that the population is very similar when it comes to attitudes and sentiment and that type of thing.
Okay, I think we'll draw the questions to a close. Please join me in thanking Isabel.
Thank you.
We now have